Let's move on to Togo, where candidates have ended their campaigns ahead of the first round of the presidential elections on Saturday. In his final public address in his hometown Kara, north of the capital Lomé, President Faure Gnassingbé told his supporters that the future of the country was now in their hands, encouraging them to turn out to vote. President Gnassingbé took over from his late father and is seeking to extend his family's half-century domination of the West African nation.
Many people in Togo have only known just two presidents in their lifetime. Faure Gnassingbé, who is running for a fourth term in an election on Saturday, and his father, Ayadema Gnassingbé. On Saturday, February the 22nd, comes yet another chance to vote for a different dynasty.
At the social level, Togolese men and women are confident that they have a president who thinks about them, a president who is always thinking about the people. In all areas, Togo ranks high up in business for Africa.
Despite several attempts, the opposition has not formed a united front, and some experts believe Gnassingbé could win the first round without having to go to a runoff vote next month. In response to political pressure, Gnassingbé enacted a law last year limiting presidents to 2 5-year terms. However, it does not account for the 3 terms Gnassingbé has already served, and so he can stay in power until 2030. Longtime opposition leader Jean-Pierre Fabre, a former journalist and human rights campaigner, is running for a third time after coming second in 2010 and 2015. He has promised to restore democracy and fuel development. Fabre says authorities blocked his campaign rallies and raised concerns about the transparency of the vote.
This election will not be credible. We know that already, since everything that would contribute to the transparency and fairness of the poll. In fact, the demands we have put forward have been swept aside. But we are going to take part in the election because this election must take place from a battle position.
5 other candidates are competing, including former Prime Minister Gabriel Misson Agbeyome Kojo, who represents a coalition of opposition and civil society groups. The Electoral Commission will maintain a centralized counting system in which results are sent to its headquarters rather than being announced in each constituency. Critics say this makes vote rigging easier, but the authorities have said the election will be free and fair.
Algeria's President Abdelmadjid Tebboune is warning against attempts to infiltrate the Hirak protest movement that unseated his predecessor and which continues to demand meaningful political reforms. Speaking on the eve of the first anniversary of the weekly demonstrations, Mr. Tebboune praised the protesters for avoiding violence, but warned there were those who wanted to change that. The Friday rallies forced the former president, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, to abandon his plans to run for a 5th term and to resign.
On February 22nd, Algerian protesters will celebrate their movement's 1-year anniversary aimed at toppling former President Abdelaziz Bouteflika and removing decades of a military ruling elite from Africa's largest country. Although Bouteflika resigned in April under pressure from the protests, demonstrators were still dissatisfied with the ruling government and the elections that took place in December without international oversight, as most candidates were seen to be allies of Bouteflika. The current president, himself a former prime minister, was one of 5 former senior officials approved as candidates for the presidential race and won 58% of the vote amidst protests and an electoral boycott. While uprisings across North Africa and the Middle East have been quelled by deadly force, Algerian authorities are on the way to becoming a powerful protest movement without a shot fired, at least for now. Thousands still march, but protests are smaller than those that toppled the veteran president last year. Some prominent figures say the opposition should accept an offer of dialogue from the government. These changes suggest the secretive authorities known to Algerians as le pouvoir, the powers that be, may have outmaneuvered the biggest threat to their rule in decades. Their strategy has been to place new faces at the top of government, while playing for time and proposing talks. The approach seems to be wearing down the opposition. The protest began nearly a year ago, flooding cities with national flags and placards, demanding a removal of the ruling elite, an end to graft and the army's withdrawal from politics. The current president was elected on an official turnout of 40%, although many protesters believe even that figure was inflated, and immediately freed many prisoners and offered dialogue with the protesters and reform of the constitution. Some politicians who embraced the protest movement known as Hirak say their struggle should now move from the streets to the negotiating table, arguing that further reforms can only be achieved through dialogue.
Police in Zambia have arrested 16 people suspected of being behind a spate of attacks in which people were sprayed with poisonous substances and some have died. President Edgar Lungu last week ordered soldiers to join the police in patrolling the streets after the attacks, which have sparked public outrage. Although residents in the capital, Lusaka, are happy for the upgraded security, others say they are still living in fear, calling on the government to do more.
We have formally arrested 16 persons, and amongst them, one of them is actually purported to be the one is funding these operations.
The soldiers have been deployed, and it has really made us safe.
Well, a court in Uganda on Thursday quashed the conviction and jail term meted out to a popular academic over her profanity and vulgarity-laced criticism of President Yoweri Museveni, ruling she did not get a fair trial. 45-year-old Stella Nyanzi, a university lecturer, author and mother of 3, has for years earned a huge following for her attacks on Museveni, often via Facebook posts, over his decades-old grip on power and crackdowns on dissent.
A Ugandan court on Thursday, February 20, quashed the conviction and jail term handed out to popular academic Stella Nyanzi over her profanity-laced criticism of President Yoweri Museveni. In August last year, Nyanzi was convicted by a magistrate's court on count of cyber harassment and sentenced to 18 months in jail. The charges stemmed from a 2018 Facebook post in which she denounced Museveni, who has ruled Uganda for more than 3 decades, as a pair of buttocks. But at the High Court on Thursday, Judge Peter Adonio accepted Nyanzi's argument that she had not received a fair trial.
The appellant is ordered to be released immediately unless he's held over some other lawful charges.
He faulted the magistrate's court for, amongst other shortcomings, rejecting her plea to summon witnesses and not giving her enough time to prepare a defense. Outside the court, a scuffle ensued as prison officers tried to hustle Nyanzi back to jail for reasons that have not been made clear. She fainted during the melee and was carried out of the compound. Security personnel fired tear gas to disperse a small crowd that had gathered as the disturbance unfolded.
Dealing with the low-cost invasion ravaging East Africa, people in Uganda have resolved to eat in the desert locusts that have devoured their crops. According to Uganda Radio Network, the residents of northern district of Kitgum have been forced to make locusts their alternative sources of food, as they have been yielding poor harvests in the area. But some people are concerned about possible health problems because the Ugandan government has been spraying locust-infested areas with pesticides to try to halt the spread. However, Kitgum District's Vector Control Officer says that consuming desert locusts isn't harmful and those caught by locals had not been sprayed yet. Resourceful residents said they were catching the locusts, then boiling and drying them before finally frying them. Desert locusts have devastated farmers in Somalia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and South Sudan in what has been described as the worst invasion in 25 years.